a suspicion a city with a lot less carbon pollution would be a happier city. I think that's true. So I met Bill McKibben when he came to meet with our Green Ribbon Commission. We had reconvened the Green Ribbon Commission to talk about how we could reduce carbon emissions in the city of Seattle. And when he spoke that day, it was in a meeting room, and he spoke about the divestment. He'll share with you what he shared with us then. And I, that afternoon, met with my finance director, just, what's possible. And that evening I said, we're gonna start down this pathway. And it was pretty easy to do that. And I just want to share some observations from Seattle as to why it was easy for me, and I think it's a good, right thing for Seattle to make that commitment. First of all, we had made a commitment years ago for our Seattle City Light to be carbon neutral and to get out of, we made a decision, and this was before I took office, the city council and the mayor made a decision to not buy power from coal anymore. So we stopped, we got out of our long-term contracts with the coal plant down in Centralia, and it exposed us to some trouble, but since then we've gone long on wind, long on solar, and long on conservation, and we don't buy coal anymore. And we're in a much better position because of it, and now Centralia is on path to being closed down by 2025, which is great news. And I'm not going to talk too much about the coal trains here, but it's like, how could we sell out of coal? How could we stop using it and then ship the equivalent of, say, a dozen Centralias a year through our city to be exported somewhere else? That just seemed really inconsistent with our values, and that spoke to the divestment issue as well. So what did we do instead? I mean, one of the ways you can produce new energy is by conserving your energy. So we launched something we call Community Power Works. Over 1,500 homes, 1 million square feet of commercial property, 24 restaurants and stores have already gone through a retrofit, an energy efficiency retrofit process. And there's something more to that too, which is we worked with the labor unions, communities of color, the contractors to create a community workforce agreement so that a certain percentage of jobs that we do on that retrofit have to be local hires. And of course, the beauty of energy efficiency, and I'm now stealing this from Dan Jones, is you can't outsource that job. You have to be in the crawl space. You have to be on the roof to do the work. And we've created a lot of jobs locally, in doing that. And this is a path to economic prosperity and shared prosperity here. I led a trip to China. We have a sister city in Chongqing, China, and we brought some of our green builders because we are some of the leading energy efficiency experts, so we have cheap electricity. If we can figure out how to save money with cheap electricity here, imagine what we could do elsewhere. That's what we can export instead of coal, right? Those are real jobs. Those are real jobs, and it's jobs that use our brains and our innovation and our creativity. I've been enjoying the last year or so because it's been the 50th anniversary of the Seattle World's Fair. And from places on Queen Anne, you can see the Space Needle. And 50 years ago, that was put up because it was going to be putting Seattle on the map. And the theme of the fair was City of the Future. Seattle would be a city of the future. And I was introduced by, I'm losing the name now, the guy from Almost Live, John Keister. John Keister introduced me as we kicked it all off. And he said it was so exciting, when the World's Fair, because it was going to be jetpacks and flying cars and monorails everywhere. And what happened? Now we have a mayor that wants us to ride a bicycle. What happened? And it was funny, right? And it was funny, and you can kind of make fun of them for not quite getting it right, because actually now, 50 years later, the challenges are in fact quite different. We're not trying to figure out how to put more energy into things to make the world better. We're trying to figure out how to take more energy out. And, finding waste, eliminating waste, putting those savings into other things is far more economically productive, environmentally productive, healthier, too. And we are trying to figure out how to create a walkable, bikeable place with more transit. So we have different ways of getting around that are far more efficient, far better for the planet than jetpacks and flying cars. But they did get it right that we would be a city of the future. They absolutely got that right. And you all know Seattle Center. It's where we have our Civic Science Center, Arts and Culture. We were going to put our mark on the map our place in the world by being innovative and creative. And just a week ago, I was at the kickoff of the Bullitt Foundation's headquarters. It's a living building. I talked about it in Frankfurt too. It's so simply described. Imagine the building in which all of the energy that's used, is sunlight that hits the building, where all of the water that's used is rainwater that falls on the property. And we can do that. And in a way, that's for our generation, for this generation, this is kind of the Space Needle for the next 50 years. This is our city of the future. This is how we're going to do it. So when Bill McKibben shows up and says we should think about, university campuses should think about divesting from fossil fuels. When we talk to people about, and we're working in coalition up and down the border, and I was actually speaking to Mayor Robertson of Vancouver, they have the same issues. It's not just coal trains. It's the tar sands pipelines, coming through Canada. There's kind of a blue line here up and down the Pacific coast where we can make a difference. And so when Bill McKibben shows up and says we should think about doing this, absolutely we should think about doing this, and we should do more than that. We should do it. Because think about who our identity is as a city. Think about what our vision of the future can be for our kids. And, for all of those reasons, to express what our values are through our actions. I was really proud that we were able to go first, and I was a little jealous. We hadn't thought of it before, and I'm extraordinarily grateful there's somebody like Bill McKibben who's willing to stand up and challenge people, and to ask the kids. And by the way, the kids are ready. I know that. The young kids are ready. They know that we need to do something different than what we've been doing. And it's kind of funny, I was sitting next to a buddy of mine from my Sierra Club days, and every once in a while when we'd be in a fight, somebody would say to us, well, what about political reality? Political reality means this. And somebody said smartly to us one time, well, but what about, actual reality, right? And actual reality is, if we're going to serve our kids, if we're going to give them a planet as beautiful as what was given to us, actual reality is we got to do something different. So with that, I'm proud to introduce Bill McKibben.
Good leadership. What happened Wednesday, Thursday was that 11 more cities around the United States announced they would divest their holdings in fossil fuels. That would not happen, at least this fast, if we hadn't been able to say Seattle, one of the greatest cities in the whole country. It's already done. It's not that scary. It's not that hard. You can do it. It says I'm doing something wrong.
Would you like to share a little more?
No, that's all right. We need to repeat all my praise of the mayor. I don't want to make him blush. Look, y'all, it really is good to be here. I'm afraid you're not getting me at my absolute best. It's very good. I know there's a fair number of people in this room. There's a number of people, and so I sort of feel a little bit like I'm with family. And so it's okay, maybe a little bit if I preached this morning at Riverside Church in New York, which is among other things, the tallest church in America. And quite a beautiful place, but it has nothing on this. This is a gorgeous sanctuary here too, and I love that butterflies hanging down in the middle, and it's just nice to be here. And to be able to say thank you to the mayor, and be able to help a little bit with the fights that you all are engaged in. I thought maybe what might be useful would just be to bring you up to date a little bit on where we are in the science, and where we are in the politics, and kind of what's going to come next. Do I have a clicker to control those slides or not?
I'm the clicker.
Okay, then just go on to the next one, the blank one, and leave it there for a minute. Well, let's get the bad news out of the way first. We're completely screwed in all kinds of ways. You know, having written the first book about all this stuff 25 years ago, it's not that I was not unprepared for global warming to kick in, but everyone, all the scientists were unprepared for how quickly and on what scale it would kick in. We've raised the temperature 1 degree Celsius thus far. It's not that much. It's about 3/4 of a watt of extra solar energy per square meter of the Earth's surface that we're trapping. Less than a small white Christmas tree light per square meter, but there are, in fact, a lot of square meters on the surface of the Earth. And so when you add it all up, it's the energetic equivalent. I think Jim Hansen calculated recently of about 400,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs going off daily, the extra energy that we're trapping. And so that energy's starting to do big things. The biggest thing it's done so far, maybe, is pretty much melt the Arctic. The new cryosat data that came out 2 weeks ago now shows that there's only about 20% of the summer sea ice left in the Arctic that was there 40 years ago. That's not a good sign. I mean, there are only so many large physical features on the planet, things that you can kind of see from outer space, and when you begin breaking them, that's not good. And of course, the other ones aren't that far behind. The ocean is all the oceans are about 30% more acidic than they were 40 years ago. And you all are already seeing the effects here and the ability of things like oyster farmers to keep their crops growing. But if you think about that, you quickly realize that we only know about that because someone's actually kind of counting and selling and whatever. I mean, if it's happening there, it's happening all up and down the marine food chain. And of course, on land, what we see most is the change in hydrology. Warm air holds more water vapor than cold. The atmosphere is 5% wetter. So that's a big change. And it means that the dice are loaded for drought and for flood. And that's what we see place after place all over the world. Every day now, someplace it's going on. Houston, Texas got 7 inches of rain in 2 hours yesterday. And then it followed, some parts they had a hailstorm so intense that there are pictures, a video of now, there's a river of hail sort of washing away down. The week before that, it was Buenos Aires, a rainstorm so severe the governor called it a tsunami of rain, more than they'd ever measured before. 50-some people apparently died in their cars, as the water rose. By now, sort of biblical scale bizarreness almost on a daily basis. And since we're in church, worth noting that the people who get hurt the worst and the first are the people that we're called upon most to try and protect. The least among us, the poorest people on the planet, are the earliest victim. Not that by now it isn't sort of affecting everyone, but, think about, say, Superstorm Sandy come roaring up the East Coast last fall. And it was a big storm, and we paid attention to it. The lowest barometric pressure ever recorded north of Cape Hatteras, and the largest wind field we've ever measured. The wind, tropical storm force winds 1,040 miles out from the eye, and all of that. And of course, it did horrible damage in New York and New Jersey, and it should have given anybody pause. The idea that our technologically advanced civilization is invulnerable to this sort of thing should have been kind of laid to rest by the sight of seawater pouring into the New York City subway system. But the place that got hit the worst from Hurricane Sandy was Haiti. More people died there than died in New York. There's still a cholera outbreak underway. They lost something like 40% of their crops as that storm blew through, and the same all over the world. You know, it was the year before that. The floods in Pakistan were so intense that 20 million people were out of their homes. The Indus River was covering a quarter of the country. Our drought last summer in the Midwest, when it was too hot to grow corn on the richest farmland in the world, that drought was a problem for farmers there, but of course they all had crop insurance and the federal government and things to back them up. It was a real problem for poor people in the rest of the world. You know, if you have to get up in the morning and find enough coins to go to the market and buy cornmeal to make tortillas with for your family that night, a 30% increase in the price of corn was the biggest thing that happened in your world last year. You know. And of course, the scary part is we're barely at the beginning of this saga. We've raised temperature 1 degree, but the same scientists told us that would happen. Are quite robust in their prediction that it'll go up 4 or 5 degrees before the century is out, unless we get off coal and gas and oil far more quickly than any government currently plans. And we can't deal with temperature increases like that. The agronomists well, there's a great study from Stanford and UW 3 years ago now that found that from this point on, every degree increase in global average temperature should cut grain yields about 10%. So if the temperature goes up 2 or 3 degrees, the number of calories on the planet could go down 20 or 30%. And we saw how that could happen looking at the Midwest last summer. Try to imagine an Earth like that. You all know enough about this planet to be able to guess what that means for any of the things we care about on this Earth. It's gotten very basic. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration released a report in January saying that it's already hot and muggy enough that the ability of humans to do outdoor labor has been cut 10% already, and that by mid-century that'll be closer to 30% on current trends. It doesn't get much more basic than that. So, that's all bad news. Take a breath, and I will take a breath. The good news is, maybe, that we're starting to figure out how to rise to this occasion. I mean, a good logical question is, given that scientists have been telling us this for 25 years, and given that economists have basically told us what we need to do to prevent it, put a price on carbon that reflects the damage it does in the atmosphere. A very big question is why we haven't done it yet. What's going on? And it's not for lack of talking about it. Those scientists and those economists have trooped up to Capitol Hill every year for the last 25 years, I think my friend Jim Hansen, who retired a couple of weeks ago from NASA, I think he's been up there 50 times, and each time patiently explaining what's going on. And the result has been a 25-year bipartisan effort to accomplish nothing, and it's been entirely successful. And the reason is astonishing power of the fossil fuel industry to block any change. They are the richest enterprise in human history. Exxon made more money last year than any company in the history of money. And it's all that they think about is, I'm not making this up. The CEO of Exxon, Rex Tillerson, went on the Charlie Rose interview program a couple of weeks ago. And Charlie Rose asked him, a series of fairly softball questions, and the most softball, we leaned in that avuncular way and said, tell me, what is your philosophy? And I think he was expecting that the CEO of Exxon would come up with some interesting answer about serving the world's development needs or something, and instead the CEO of Exxon thoughtfully looked into the camera and said, my philosophy is to make money. Period, end of story. So high marks for honesty, you know. And it would behoove the rest of us to pay attention to that and understand that that means that unless we interrupt this particular game, the same thing will keep happening that's been happening for a long time. Reason and scientific precision can't stand up to all that money. It certainly hasn't yet. And so it is incumbent upon us to figure out other currencies to work in, to find things that can stand up to it. And the only things I can ever think of are the kind of currencies of movements, passion and spirit and creativity. And, you know, sometimes one needs to spend one's body too. And that's the good news, that that's begun to happen in a serious way. We started 350.org 5 years ago now, this past winter. Seems like more than 5 years, I confess, but 5 years ago. And of course, we took the odd name from what the scientists, particularly Jim Hansen and his team, had just published a paper saying the most carbon you can safely have in the atmosphere is 350 parts per million. Beyond that, it's not compatible with the planet on which civilization developed and to which life on Earth is adapted, which is fairly strong language. And the bad news is, of course, that we're already well past that. Sometime in the next week or 10 days, the CO2 detector on the side of Mauna Loa, the most important scientific instrument in the world, set up in 1959 by Charles Keeling, it'll tick past 400 parts per million for the first time in human history, for the first time in much longer than human history. And on we go. So that, you know, when we heard that news, it was not, I mean, it was depressing. The paper that Hansen wrote was depressing. But it did give us an idea about how we could organize the world. The thing we were most worried about was that how can you talk to everybody on the planet because they all speak different languages? But Arabic numerals, of course, get around this problem. 350 means the same thing in Seattle and in Saigon, you know, so we went to work. And I say we, in this case, at the beginning, it was myself and 7 undergraduates at Middlebury College where I teach. We had no money, which should have probably concerned us, and no, you know, list or anything, but we were, you know, we didn't know enough not to know what we shouldn't be doing. Anyway, there were 7 undergraduates, and there are 7 continents, so each one took one. Off we went to work, and the guy who got the Antarctic also had to take the internet, and only fair, and we went to work, you know, and our work was really sort of what I'm doing tonight. It was to find other people like ourselves around the world that we could convince to pitch in. And not everywhere is there something called an environmentalist, you know, but everywhere there's somebody worried about development or women's issues or hunger or war and peace, or the things you can't have on a planet that's just disintegrating. So they were the natural allies, and we asked everybody, including people here in Seattle who did a great job. So we did this first day in the fall of 2009, everybody come together to help, please, figure out something to do. We had no idea it would work. We got the sense that it was going to work. 2 days beforehand. We were sitting around our little office, around a table, with one table, 8 of us there with our laptops open, and phone rang, satellite phone rang, and it was our leader in Ethiopia. Like everybody else, like me, still a volunteer in this work. And like many of our leaders, she was 17, and she was in tears. And she said, the government took away our permit for Saturday. We can't do our thing then. We're going to do it today before they can stop us, which was brave. But that wasn't why she was in tears. She just kept saying, we so want to do this at the same time as everybody else. We don't want to spoil it for everybody. We want to be part of the whole big thing. And she said, and here we can show the slide, I think, and she said, we do have 15,000 kids right now out in the street, and might as well change them to 350. I was like, wow, don't worry about the date, it's okay. And on we went. And we can just flip through a few of these pictures. For the next 48 hours, you can just go through if you want here. The picture of those American soldiers in Afghanistan. One of the things to note as you go through, and you can stop on this one for a minute, one of the things that's really important to me, over the next 48 hours, there were 5,200 demonstrations in 181 countries. CNN called it the most widespread day of political activity in the planet's history. And the thing that was important to me to note, because I had always heard my whole life that environmentalism was something that rich white people did. It turns out actually that's not true at all. I mean, in fact, the biggest obstacle in the way of human progress at the moment is rich white people. Most of the people that we were working with around the world were poor, black, and brown, and Asian, and young, because that's mostly what there is, you know. And the future bears down hard on them, so they are more than willing to go to work, and you know, it was beautiful to see. I mean, that's someplace on the Congo River above Kinshasa. That's where Conrad, in his Eurocentric way, identified the heart of darkness on our planet, you know. They're poor, they didn't have a digital camera. The picture they developed in someone's home darkroom didn't come out so well, so they wrote in what their banners in. But there they were, you know, taking part in this whole thing. If you go on, you can see some of the other, lots of creativity, and lots of, this is a good picture, lots of involvement of religious communities for the first time in this kind of work. There's the biggest evangelical college in the country. Stop there for a minute. I've been to Bethlehem to do some organizing. It's not an easy place to get to, but the Dead Sea is shrinking very rapidly as temperatures rise. So everybody wanted to do something. Too many military checkpoints in the way to really, so the Jordanians said, we'll make the 3 on our shore. The Palestinians said, we'll do the 5 on our beach. The Israelis said, we'll take care of the 0. It's good. 300 demonstrations across China, an important place to be doing this work. Police busted up one of them, but the others went off, and it was good, Those are our allies in the Maldives. Maldives in the Indian Ocean, beautiful archipelago, highest point in this. I mean, this country's 5,000 years of continuous human habitation, but the odds of 5,100, I'm afraid, are pretty slim because the highest point in the whole country is about 1.5 meters above sea level. Okay, so not good, but this was the biggest story on Google News for about 36 hours, and I think the reason is that people didn't look the way that people expected environmentalists to look. The next picture is from Yemen, which is a tough place. All the women in that 0 are wearing full black burqa, okay? So to us, they don't look like members of the Sierra Club, but they're, hearts are in exactly the same place. They're thinking about the future, they're thinking about other people, they're thinking about something beyond themselves. Those are, it's oil-rich Abu Dhabi. There are oil-rich sheikhs down front, but smarter than some of your other oil-rich sheikhs because there behind them is the edge of the largest solar array on planet Earth. All right? So that's good. There were 300 or 400 pictures that just ended up in a file called 350 Adorable. You know. And they really were adorable, and they're also hard to look at. I mean, those girls will probably be refugees someday through no fault of their own. So, we've kept doing it, and you can just flip through these pictures real fast, Katie, just boom right through them. We've kept doing these work all over the world. We've had 4 of these big global days of action in Seattle. It's always been a huge help and in the lead. We've done about 20,000 rallies in every country on earth except North Korea, and it's been wonderful and exciting and beautiful, and it's spread this message in lots of places where people didn't know about it. Just keep going there and then let it go. And it's been very exciting and good and useful work, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. And sometimes we've done huge art projects that Tom York of Radiohead, you go back on Tom York of Radiohead, assembled 3,000 of his closest friends there in blue raincoats to make an image of King Canute trying to pull back the rising tide. We're making the pictures so big, there's so many people in the next one from the DR that we had to, the only way to take a picture was to borrow a satellite for the day. Same, just beautiful big images. That's Scarab Beetle, there's Polar Bear. That one's stopped there, that one's to Dry River Bed in Santa Fe, and when the satellite came over, just thousands of people put blue sheets up over their heads to kind of try and bring it back to life for a minute, and then so stop there. All that educational work is incredibly important, really good, and I love doing it, and I think it's vital and all of that, but I also think it's not enough. All the time we're thinking as we build this movement, we've got to build it to the point where it can start to take serious action, and that's what we've been trying to do, and in a sense that really began with this fight against this Keystone Pipeline, which nobody had heard of. In the spring of 2011, except the people who live up in Alberta, the native people whose lives have been turned upside down, and except a few people along the route, mostly in Nebraska, ranchers who were upset that their land being taken by eminent domain and worried about the danger as they should be of spills into the Walla Aquifer. But nobody else had heard of it. And then Jim Hansen put out a little paper saying, you might want to pay attention because those tar sands in Alberta are the second largest pool of carbon on Earth. If you could burn them all off tonight, the atmospheric concentration of CO2 would go overnight from 400 parts per million to 540 parts per million, just from that one place. Never mind the Middle East or Venezuela, or Australia or China or anything else, just there. So, though everybody said the odds were impossible, we decided to at least make a little fight of it. And I wrote a note asking people if they'd come to Washington and get arrested, because we figured that it might take the power of civil disobedience to draw attention to it. And to our surprise, and everybody else's surprise, a lot of people, well actually the most surprised were the police, who were used to dealing with 3 or 4 people at a time doing this, but on the first day of this 2-week thing, there were 80 or 90 of us showed up, and so the police said, well, we're not going to do what we usually do, which is just take you to the police station in handcuffs and fine you $100 and let you go. You guys are going to go to jail for a while so we can try and deter the rest who are coming. And so we got to spend 3 days in Central Cell Block in DC, which is as much fun as it sounds like it might be. But you know what? Not the end of the world. The end of the world's the end of the world. And that's why we're sort of doing this. And it was actually really powerful. And it didn't do what the police had hoped. The logic that probably works fairly well with criminals appears to backfire with idealists. more than 2 weeks were over, 1,253 people had been arrested, the largest civil disobedience action about anything in 30 years in this country. And you can put flip right past that. Keep going. Spread all over the world, you know, and the Canadians are going to meet all our friends and all around the world. And we went back to the White House and surrounded it with 15,000 people. You can stop there 5 deep, and it was really beautiful, really great. And actually, in a way, it worked. I mean, the president, 4 days after that, said, okay, we'll stop for a year and evaluate. Take another look. I mean, and there were people who said this is sort of cynical because it just takes it past the election, and you know, and maybe they're right. But it did stop it for a year. So far, really by now, 18 months, which means we've kept about 500 million barrels of the dirtiest oil on earth in the ground for that period of time, which isn't enough to win the fight, but it's not nothing either, you know. And now the fight's back on in a big way. As you all know, last week we submitted 1 million public comments to the state. That was pretty good. And 2 months ago, 3 months ago, there were some people in this room were there. We had the largest environmental rally, climate rally ever in this country on the Mall in Washington. 50,000 people out there to show that no one had forgotten about this pipeline, and it was great. I don't know how it'll come out. It's a hard fight. The oil industry has all the money. The Koch brothers own huge leases across those tar sands in Alberta. These guys will spend what it takes. We've been very effective job creators. It's been, in essence, a full employment act for lobbyists in Washington, going to work for the oil industry to try and push this thing through. And they may win, may not too. But it's helped spawn all kinds of other fights, and I think sort of help people understand that it's time to take these guys on. And so in Canada, people have blocked, and really blocked, the proposed pipeline to the coast of British Columbia. It's not going to get built. The First Nations people in the lead and all kinds of everybody else behind them, they've blocked it. And you know what? I think that people in this part of the Pacific Coast are going to block those proposed coal ports. Yeah. 5 proposed coal ports, 2 are dead already. And that's good, because every time that we knock another one off, it lets us concentrate that much harder on the ones that are left, you know. I don't think they're going to get built. People are, I think, maybe passing around the site. If there's anybody here who's not part of Power Past Coal, you should be, because you guys have the absolute historic opportunity to be a real to be a significant pain in the ass to the possible. They cannot get their stuff out of Montana and Wyoming. It's huge coal, as big as the tar sands. They can't, Joe, you passing that around? Good. They can't get that out if they can't get it past you guys. I mean, that's just the long and the short of it. If you block those coal ports, then that coal is much of it's gonna stay in the ground. And if you can do it, if we can keep it in the ground for 3 or 4 or 5 more years, well, it'll never get burned, because sooner or later the planet is going to realize that it's in the process of committing some kind of strange suicide. And at that point we'll wake up. So our job, those of us who already know that, is to keep things as where they are for the short run, so that in the long run it'll still be good. There's great fights like this going on all over the place, against new coal-fired power plants, against mountaintop removal, coal mining, against tar tar sands pipelines elsewhere. They're trying to put one across New England, you know. I don't think they're going to succeed there either. I think everybody was, you know, a lot of people were watching a couple of weeks ago when the tar sands pipeline in Arkansas burst, and now there's a subdivision where Exxon's going to have to buy every home, I think, because nothing else is going to. It's very good to see all this.
What about Trans Mountain?
There you go. And the Kinder Morgan pipeline across BC, many, many others. And that's kind of the point I was going to make next. We're actually not going to stop global warming one pipeline at a time. But we got to fight all these things, and we got to play defense every place we can. We also have to go on offense against these guys, okay? Because there's just too many coal mines and pipelines and everything else. It's incredibly hard to figure out how to stop each one. Too much gets through. The basic structure of this industry has to change. We have to be able to put that price on carbon, and we have to be able to do it. That means that we have to break the power of that industry enough to allow that to happen. Because at the moment, we're not close in Washington. The terrible cap-and-trade climate bill that hardly would have done anything. It was as meek and mild a piece of legislation as you could imagine. But when it came up in 2009, when there were still 60 Democrats in the U.S. Senate, they didn't even take a vote on it. They were so scared of the fossil fuel industry. The last whip count before they abandoned the whole operation showed that there were 43 senators willing to vote for this incredibly weak, and we're far away, which is why we have to figure out how to weaken the power of these guys, which is precisely why we're doing this divestment work around the country. I published a story in Rolling Stone last summer, and what it said was, you know, the math is now painfully clear. If we're going to stay below 2-degree temperature increase, the scientists tell us we can burn 565 more gigatons worth of carbon. That'll take us about 14 years at current trend, which is not good. But much worse was the third number, the new one. It came from financial analysts in the UK who went through all the SEC filings and said, these companies have already in their reserves 2,800 gigatons worth of carbon, 2,800 billion tons. 5 times more than the most conservative governments or scientists on Earth think would be safe to burn. But they're going to burn it. I mean, that's what their share price derives from. That's what they borrow money against. That's what their business plan says they're going to do. They're going to burn it, and then they're going to go looking for more. Exxon spends $100 million every single day looking for more hydrocarbons to burn up in the Arctic, or where up in the Arctic's particularly ironic and annoying. I mean, they melted the damn thing, and now they're, okay, good, that makes it easier to look for more, The end of the story is written unless we change script. There's no doubt or speculation or wishful thinking, which is why we said, let's try and go after these guys the same way we did around apartheid 25 years ago. One of the few times that we've been able to stand up to big industry, and that divestment campaign was very powerful. 155 colleges and universities divested, 100 and some city and state governments. And, when Nelson Mandela got out of prison, one of the first places he came was the U.S., and he did not go to Washington, D.C. first. He went out to the University of California to say thanks to students who had forced the divestment of $3 billion worth of stock. He said, we fought for our own liberation, but in a globally linked world, we can't do this by ourselves. We need everybody. We need people pushing who have access to the wealth and the power and the prestige. And when we were doing this tour around the country in November, trying to kind of spark this thing, we showed a great video, a little video from Desmond Tutu, Mandela's great accomplice in that work, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, and maybe greatest churchman in the world, you know, at the moment. And Tutu said, if you could see what was happening now in Africa, the famine, the drought and things, you would know why I'm asking you to take up those same set of tools that I asked you to take up 25 years ago and go to work. And the good news is that people have. By the time we were done that tour in Christmas time, there were 200 and some college campuses where this divestment fight was underway. It's grown to 343 now. 4 campuses have now divested their fossil fuel stock, way ahead of our schedule, and very exciting to see. And we're still in the early days, you know. We're still in most places at the point where we're just getting the boards of trustees to say no, so that we can really begin the, work. I'm not going to tell you where, but someplace tomorrow, I think we're going to have the first serious, place where the president comes into his office and finds that he's not the only one there, and that'll be good. It's very good to see. Very good to see young people taking this up, and very good to see faculty and people helping them. And it'd be really good to see alumni. I take it some people here probably attended college. I'm just guessing. You've noticed that your institutions continue to have an interest in you. Send you envelopes each year, and we need you taking an interest. In fact, the folks who are launching the new 350.org chapter in Seattle are also working a lot to build up a head of steam around the divestment campaign at the University of Washington. And they're going to meet actually with the regents on the 13th of June. So before that, write a letter to the regents, and there's going to be a rally on the 13th. Pay attention. And pay attention to this new 350.org organizing thing. Next big meeting, May 8th, 7 o'clock, Keystone Church. Keystone, easy name to remember.
The date of that?
May 7 p.m., Keystone Church on Keystone Place. I wrote another piece for Rolling Stone about 2 weeks ago, and I said that I think the time's come to give a name to all this various and diverse activity that's underway. One of the privileges of being a writer is that you get to name things, or try to, and names are important. They help us understand what we're doing. It's not just the kind of scattered people fighting this here and that here, and this here and that there. It's a fossil fuel resistance that's emerging all over the country and now around the world. And it knows what it wants. I mean, the world that we're looking for is hard to imagine. All you have to do is look at the few countries that have actually really made a serious attempt to do it. The biggest by far is Germany. Germans got serious about this 15, 20 years ago and got to work. And at this point, more than a quarter of their power is coming from renewable sources, and it'll be 50% inside of 10 years, and it'll be well past 50%. I mean, it's just acquired this incredible momentum. There were days last summer when Germany generated more than half the power it used from solar panels within its borders. This is Germany. Munich is north of Montreal, I mean, this is, think what you could do if you happen to have, say, I don't know, Texas and California, Florida, New Mexico, and Nevada. But you know what? There are, at the moment, there are more solar panels in Bavaria than there are in all of the United States. Okay? So, it's not, the point is a lack of technology that flusters us. It's a lack of political will to put that technology to work. And that's what this resistance is trying to build. And it's trying to build it by taking down the power of the people who are in the way. This industry, it simply has to meet its match before the planet meets its match. It's not that we have anything against people who work in it. The day that we put a serious price on carbon is the day that the fossil fuel companies become energy companies. And one guesses that Exxon, if it spent $100 million a day putting up solar panels, would be pretty good at that. It's just that they can't make quite as much money doing that. The problem with solar energy, from their point of view, is it's difficult to meter the sun, and so they can make money, just not quite as much, and that's why they'll fight it tooth and nail, and that's where we need to be. I think, Katie, there's a few more pictures here, if I remember correctly. You can go past that one. These are, actually go back to that one, it's a good story. There was a day last spring, last April, when the biggest climate denier of the fossil fuel funded group called the Heartland Institute put up the billboards that had all these pictures of strange, like, serial killers, Charles Manson, and apparently the point was to try and convince everyone that everyone who believed in global warming was a serial killer. It's not only sort of rude and hateful and stuff, it's also just like bizarre logic anyway. It's like, what if Adolf Hitler had believed in gravity? Would that mean we couldn't do it? But it was actually, I think the reason they did it was because that same weekend, they put these up on a Friday morning, and that day, the next day, we were launching this most recent of our big global days of action, which we called Connect the Dots. And we were asking people all over the world, in places that had felt the sting of climate change, to rally. We were trying to put a human face on climate change. We're trying to do the opposite, really, of what those guys were doing. Show people what people who had already felt. They didn't believe in climate change. They knew that it was going on. So we have people in 3,000 places rallying, but these are some of them, underwater and dying reefs, or in places with horrible drought or with rising sea level. A few of the problems were slightly more severe. There are folks in Bellingham. Just all over the place. Wildfires. In the Bekaa Valley, I like that picture. Places where sea level's rising too fast. That top red balloon is where the Dead Sea was 40 years ago. That picture just came with a little note that said, "There is no water behind our dam anymore." In Pakistan, the opposite problem. These guys, you see the next slide there, these guys were in the part of that 20 million people who had to leave their homes when the Indus flooded so badly. Just all over the place. That's just because I'm homesick, so that's but the same thing all over the place. There they are, blocking the coal trains on the BC border. Stop there. That was the one that really got me. I mean, maybe the smallest demonstration, just some river turning into or street turning into a muddy river. But the reason it got me was just what the sign said. Your actions affect me, which is true. I mean, I told you before, these guys are, dying as we speak from cholera and whatever else. What's wild is, though, just go back to that one in the 80s. What's wild is that it's not true in reverse, okay? There's nothing really that they can do to change the way this story comes out, except appeal to our consciences. They can't burn less fossil fuel because they don't really burn any now. They don't have the headquarters of the world's biggest companies to go to. They can't, they don't have, that's us. We have the ability to do those things. And we need you to keep your eye out at 350.org. The next thing we're going to do, I think, is going to happen this summer. The last 10 days of July are statistically the hottest 10 days of the year every year. We've been trying to make them politically hot too. 10 or 12 places scattered around the country where this fossil fuel resistance is fighting key fights. We're going to try and put a real focus on them, get as many people as we can there. Some of them will be doing civil disobedience. We might need some of you to be willing to, actually let me finish this by telling you two things from those arrests that we did in Washington that stuck in my mind, and it's important. One of them, I'm looking at the demographics of this, one of them, I wrote a letter asking people to come and get arrested. I said, I don't think college kids should have to be the only cannon fodder here in this stuff. They lead the fight most of the time, they're doing most of the work. But if you're 22 in our economy, maybe really an arrest record, maybe not the best thing on your resume. One of the few unmixed blessings of aging is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you? So it was quite good to see a lot of people who with hairlines more or less like mine who did not ask people how old are you, because that would be rude, but we did cleverly say who was president when you were born. The two biggest groups came from the FDR and the Truman administration. I was telling people, I think the last time I was here, the last day there was a guy arrested with a sign around his neck that said World War II vet, handle and care. So old that he'd been born in the Warren Harding administration, which was so long ago that, frankly, I'd forgotten there was a war. So that was good. It was very good to see elders acting like elders. Second thing that was unusual about those was we asked people, if you're going to come get arrested, would you please wear a dress or a necktie? I mean, I wore a necktie today because you guys, it's church and things. I don't normally wear one. I live in Vermont. We're even more casual than y'all. But we wanted to make a visual point that really undergirds everything I've been saying, which is, there's absolutely not a thing radical about what we're asking for at all. All we're asking for is a planet that works more or less the way we did when we were born, and the way all human beings that we know about for the last 10,000 years of the Holocene, everyone that we have history for, have a planet that works a little bit like did that. That's not a radical demand. That's, if you think about it, a conservative demand. Radicals work at oil companies. Radicals work at coal companies. If you're willing to get up in the morning and your philosophy is to make money and you're willing to do it by altering the chemistry of the atmosphere in ways that scientists have said will be ruinous and that we now can see will be ruinous because we have melted the Arctic. If you're willing to do that, then you are a very great radical indeed. You are engaged in a more radical act than any human being that came before you. And our job is to figure out how to check that radicalism quickly before it overwhelms every good thing that we have. And this has to happen fast. That's the thing. I mean, and that's why I leave here in a few minutes and we're driving to Walla Walla tonight because I have to be talking 9 in the morning at Whitman College, you know. I'll be in San Francisco the next day, and I'll be in Iceland 2 days after that, and then Australia, and then Turkey, and then on and on it goes, and it's craziness. But we have to do it quickly. That's the thing. We have to build this movement fast and sharp because we're not actually negotiating with other human beings. We're negotiating with physics, and physics is a bad negotiator. It doesn't compromise. It's not interested in how hard it is for us or how much easier it would be to do it slowly and gradually or anything else. It just takes the carbon that we throw at it and it does with it what it's going to do. That's the problem. So, I can't promise you that we're going to win. Don't know that. We've waited a long time to get started and we are behind. Seriously behind. On the other hand, I can now promise you, when I got up on February and looked out over the 50,000 people out there on the mall in Washington, the only thing I could think of to say really was, I've waited my whole life to see if we actually were going to have a movement to fight climate change, and now I know we are. I know we're going to fight. All I can say is I very much look forward to doing it shoulder to shoulder with you all and being back in this part of the world for the big party when all 5 of those coal ports go down. Late at night, so I won't be in the slightest bit offended if anybody needs to go. But if there are a few minutes worth of questions or ideas or abuse or whatever it is, Katie, you pick.
I keep waiting to hear that some rich, smart business person investor is divesting just on an economic.
Oh, it's starting to happen. So, one of the best parts of the divestment campaign so far has been a couple of those guys have emerged. Not all rich white people turn out to be the problem. There's a guy named Jeremy Grantham, a billionaire investor in Boston, who actually came to Washington to get arrested in this last fight. And from this coast in California, a guy named Tom Starr, who founded one of the largest hedge funds in the country, a thing called Farallon Capital Management. If you look him up in the Forbes 400 list, he's worth an impressive, I like my new rich tongue. He's worth an impressive $1.4 billion. He quit his job, told his money guys to sell all his fossil fuel investments, partly for moral reasons, he said, but partly because he thinks it's a terrible investment. And what he's been going around telling colleges is, you guys should definitely divest because you've got an edge on other people right now. Other investors are, looking at the Wall Street Journal every morning, which is not a good source of information about climate change. You guys have something called a physics department, and it can inform you exactly how big this carbon bubble is. And in fact, once they started when I wrote this piece for Rolling Stone, I was pretty sure that the numbers were sound and things, but I was still happy to see in the fall when the World Bank and the International Energy Agency McKibben City, both put out reports corroborating those numbers. In the last 3 weeks, both HSBC, the second biggest bank in the world, and Citigroup, the third or fourth biggest, have put out major research reports saying if you took this 2-degree target seriously, if the countries of the world did anything to live up to their pledge, their, in many cases, legally binding pledge, they'll try to hold emissions to the point where it won't go above 2 degrees. If we did that, then the value of these companies' shares would be cut in half. So, the word's beginning to get around. Pension funds and places are starting to have to deal with the fact that there's a real, what they would call exposure risk now. And the more that we build this campaign, the greater that risk will get. So, it's not the key part of the reason above all we wanted to do this divestment thing was just so that people would be forced to grapple with the knowledge that these companies were rogue companies, that they were outlaw, not against the laws of the state, they get to write those, but outlaw against the laws of physics, okay? And we wanted people to have to grapple with that all the time, but it's already starting to bite some for them, and the more we do it, the more it'll bite.
We appreciate your inspiration, Bill. I was there in November when you got this whole thing kicked off, and you brought up the concept of activism from some of us that have been around a little bit longer, and how, what else do we have to lose? And I started thinking about it then, and thinking about the years we were fighting Vietnam, and what happened. We were able to stop that. We were able to stop that war, and it wasn't easy, but we did it. And then I thought again tonight when you spoke again about what is it we have to lose, especially those of us that have been around for a little while. And I think back a couple years now, was it, when Fukushima had that incredible disaster? And what did some of the older people do that I understood occurred, who had to help try to shut that thing from going awry? They stepped up and said, my life is nearly ended. I'm going to step into the reactor and help close it down. Now, you're not asking us to do that.
No.
You're asking 1, 2, or 3 days to sit in the cell. I think it's worth for me to think about a little more closely than I've ever done that.
I've talked to a number of people. I think you said that. I've talked to a number of people in the last 6 months who come and say, this is on my bucket list now. So, words get around.
I just want to know, what do you think about earthships as a solution to...
About
earthships. Do you know this type of houses? Earthships.
Earthships, oh yeah. Well, so there's lots and lots of, and that's a particularly good and beautiful example, but there's lots and lots of things that one can do. Figure out how to build one's dwelling, how to make one's campus green, all the sort of things that we do. They all work, they're all good, and we all should do them. When I'm not on airplanes flying around, I'm pretty green at home. I have solar panels everywhere and insulation and feet thick and, pretty close to zero footprint. But also don't try to fool myself into thinking that that's actually how we're going to stop climate change. Given the time that we have, systemic and structural reform is what will get the job done. Now, if we had 100 years, it'd be a different story. And then the correct and proper way to change would be to concentrate mostly on those things. And the word would spread and our culture would slowly change, and that's how humans change best, gradually, and cheaper and less traumatic and all that. But we don't have that luxury, so we got to do the things close to home, and they're important and worth doing, and we got to save enough energy to do the political stuff too. Because it's the stuff that has some hope of actually changing things on the scale they have to change. It's a good question, very good question. We have time for one more.
Wow, thank you. Bill, you are one family, and we're so grateful to have you here, brother. It's such a gift. For those of us who are taking the call to divestment very seriously with our respective institutions, I have a question in particular from the faith community, but I think it will apply broadly. There's a number of us who've started this conversation on various levels with our churches and calling for serious divestment. I've been in conversation with the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility, and you probably know their position. I bring it out in this forum because I really would love to hear your public response to this. And in particular, the contention that the approach, such as the South African divestment, we're beyond that at this point. I just want to read a quick email from my friend from ICCR. In its call for divestment from fossil fuel companies, the 350.org campaign cites the apartheid movement. I'll go on. Moreover, many investors believe that the stock market has dramatically changed since then, with many more global buyers in the stock market, including mutual funds, hedge funds, large institutional investors, and individual investors. As a result, many active, engaged, socially responsible investors believe that the fossil fuel companies would actually prefer for them to divest, that they would no longer be at the table.
Yeah.
So can you please speak to that, because that's
Sure.
huge for us.
No, it's a very good, I should have talked about the role of faith communities to begin with in this divestment thing. It's been exciting to watch how quickly it's spreading. The United Church of Christ will vote this summer on whether to divest. The number of Quaker statewide groups already have. The biggest news came last week when the Uniting Church of Australia, the largest Protestant denomination in Australia, voted to divest. Now, the argument, there's been a kind of institutionalized and professionalized sort of shareholder activism thing. This is this ICCR thing. And they don't like this kind of stuff. Necessarily, because they're very used to this model where they work with companies to try to make them better, which is a good model, very good model. It works really well when there's a flaw in the business plan that we've got to fix, okay? So, if Apple isn't paying its Chinese laborers enough money, it doesn't mean that we have to get, hate iPhones and get rid of them. It means that we have to use shareholder resolutions and proxy fights and whatever else to try and persuade them to pay a reasonable wage, and that's what we've been able to do. And most of the time, that's what we want to do. But there are times when the flaw is the business plan, okay? And that's the problem in this case. There's no way at the moment to sit down and at the table with Exxon and persuade them to get out of the fossil fuel business. They made $55 billion in profit last year doing what they're doing, okay? And they will keep doing it, and they will, more to the point, keep spending the money to make sure that they're always able to do it by corrupting our political process. The largest campaign donation post-Citizens United came 2 weeks before the last election from Chevron. And it was designed to make sure that the House of Representatives stayed in the hands of climate deniers, and it was successful. And so in those cases, we don't divest in order to bankrupt Exxon. We're not probably going to be able to do that, at least in the short run. We do it for a number of reasons, but most of them are tactical, to try and take away their social license. So they're no longer able to dominate our political process in the same way, to do to them what we did in the tobacco industry, And people made exactly the same argument around South Africa, 25 years ago. They said, we should keep engaged and it'll help, black South Africans because, they'll have a better, we'll do something to make it. It was Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu who said, no way. We need you, this thing is evil, and we need you to disengage with it and take that power and use it that way. And they turned out to be right, both morally and practically. And I think in this case, people like Tutu are right again. It's also just worth saying, you know, quite aside from all the strategic and tactical and everything else, if it's wrong to wreck the climate, then it's wrong to profit from wrecking the climate. Okay? It's just not all right to be in that business. And that's why it's so good. I mean, when I was at Riverside, it was fun. It was interesting. Riverside this morning, because it's a very liberal and progressive church. Maybe the, you know, one of the kind of bulwarks of liberal Christianity. But it was also the church built by John D. Rockefeller, the greatest oil baron of all time. And it was really powerful to be there. And they're in active consideration of divesting their $10 million in fossil fuel stock, which would be a really big deal coming out of that church and that place. So, you know, we love the people who have sort of done this professionally for a long time. We like to work with them. But for my money, it's really good to see young people saying, you know what, it's not really getting the job done in the time that we have. It's not happening, and so we're going to try something else, and we're going to push a little harder. And I just think pushing is what we got to do now. The time for kind of absolute politeness is over, even in church, where we have a too strong a tendency to be a little too polite. Thank you all.
By standing up, you signed a photo release.
Bill and I have done this 3 times now.
Yes.
Memorial Hall here, and when we kicked off the fight, I could tell him.
That's right. A great picture from Bellingham.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, we raise our fists too.
Fists in the air.
Fantastic. Thank you all.
Thank you all for coming. As you leave, I want you to know we have a local bookseller just right in this room right here, and we're going to ask Bill to stick around maybe about 10, 15 minutes to sign books, but not for long. But if you'd like to buy a book and have it signed by Bill, right through this door here. And please, buy your books locally.